GraphicAudio presents an audio guide to the Rogue Angel series, created by Alex Archer, presented in rich, vivid graphic audio, a movie in your mind. In the third decade of the 15th century, France was in turmoil. Plague had decimated the populace. Sickness, assassinations, and political wrangling weakened the monarchy. And across the English Channel, a young upstart named Henry V saw a golden opportunity to claim France for himself. In the tiny village of Domremy, a young girl received a vision from God and his saints, a plan to save the precious land of France. Donning armor and taking up arms, she led an army to rout the English and break the siege of Orléans, gaining for herself a place in history. But she is remembered not just for the triumphs of her life, but for the tragic circumstances of her death. The English had tied the maiden to a pillar in the marketplace. She stood atop a pile of wood, and more logs were piled up to her calves. Her executioner had also outfitted her with small bundles of sticks and straw that were tied to her calves, thighs, hands, torso, and hair. Her death was to be cruel and painful. Sickness twisted Rue's stomach.
She will not burn. She will not die. This is not her destiny.
Still, for all that was in him to believe, he doubted. The young woman had always been stronger in her convictions. Her faith was one of the things that had drawn him to her. That, and the raw, unbridled power that clung to her. Rue had never been able to withstand the pull of that force. As she faced death, clad in the same male clothing she'd worn so proudly in battle, she stood solemn and unshaken.
She didn't come here to die. She's going to be all right.
We can't just stand here and let them kill her.
What do you propose, apprentice? Should we rush in, you and I, and slay all the English warriors and free her?
No, we can't do that. They would only kill us.
Pierre Cochon, the presiding judge, stepped forward and read out the charges.
You, the accused, stand convicted of heresy and of being opposed to the church. You have committed the acts of a bloodthirsty killer, and you are possessed by demons.
No mention was made of his own part in the bloody Cabochon revolt in 1413, or his defense of the assassination of the Duke of Orléans in 1407. At the bailiff's command, soldiers lit fires along the pyre. Flames eagerly leaped up and twisted through the jumble of wood. The stench of smoke filled the air.
Un crucifix! Montrez-moi un crucifix! Le Christ, mon sauveur, me livre vos saints!
The young woman asked only that her friends hold up a crucifix so that she could look upon it. Two men did. The maid prayed to her Savior, asking for the aid of the saints.
You can't just let her die. Not like this. She's made for more than this.
Unable to stand anymore, Rue surged forward.
Enough!
Heads turned in his direction. Several townspeople drew back from him fearfully as the English soldiers converged on him with drawn swords and maces. Rue drew his saber.
Set her free! By God, you'll set her free! Or you'll know the fiery pits of hell yourselves for judging her!
Before he could take another step, something crashed into the back of Rue's skull. The English soldiers took away his saber and kicked him dozens of times. They stopped short of killing him. While Rue was being beaten, the English commander took the maiden warrior's famed sword and raised it high. The broadsword, plain and unadorned, gleamed in the firelight. He put the tip against the ground and his foot at the center of the blade. The broadsword shattered, falling into fragments in the mud. Peasant and soldier pushed forward and snatched the shards from the trampled mud. The commander tossed the hilt deep into the crowd. The young girl who was martyred that spring day in 1430 would be forever known as Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orléans. But what of her sword? that plain broadsword that shone like a beacon in Joan's hand. For the next 500 years it disappeared into the mists of history, its fragments scattered like chaff by the winds of time. Annja Creed knows something of the mists of history and the winds of time. Trained as an archaeologist and host of a popular cable TV series called Chasing History's Monsters, she travels the globe in search of myths and legends to titillate the viewing public. As the resident voice of reason, she often debunks the supernatural stories, but her chestnut hair, green eyes, and martial artist's physique do much to attract many fans to the cable show. Attributes that her producer, Doug Morell, appreciates more than Annja's knowledge and expertise.
Hello, Doug. It's Annja. I'm returning your call.
Doug Morell was a friend and one of her favorite production people at Chasing History's Monsters. He lived in Brooklyn, not far from her, and was a frequent guest and dining companion. He was trendy, and was never interested in going out into the field for stories as Annja did.
I was just looking over the piece you're working on. The Beast of Gevaudan.
What about it?
French werewolf thing, right?
They don't know what it was.
Looking over it today, after Christie did The Werewolf of Cologne, I'm thinking maybe this isn't the story we want to pursue. I mean, 2 stories set in France about werewolves might not be where our viewers want to go.
Annja avoided an angry response. Evidently, lycanthropy wasn't as popular as vampirism, because Chasing History's Monsters had done a week-long series on vampires. Neither history nor geography was something Doug had an interest in.
Peter Stubb, the so-called Werewolf of Cologne, was German, not French.
French, German, I'm not seeing a whole lot of difference here. Europe tends to blur together for me. I think it does for most of our fans.
That was the difference between a big-name show and one that was syndicated, Annja supposed. The networks had audiences. Cable programs had fans. But she could live with that. This check was going to get her to North Africa.
Europe shouldn't blur together. The histories of each country are hugely different.
If you say so. My problem is I don't especially feel good about sticking 2 hairy guys on as my leads so close together.
Then save the Labette piece. Just let me do my job and give me my airfare.
If I save the Labette piece, I've got a hole I need to fill.
The pieces are different. Peter Stubb was more than likely a serial killer. He claimed victims for 25 years between 1564 and 89. Supposedly, he had a magic belt given to him by the devil that allowed him to change into a wolf.
There's no mention of a magic belt in Christie's story.
Annja wasn't surprised. Christie Chatham wasn't noted for research, just a killer bod in scanty clothing while prowling for legends. For her, history never went past her last drink or her last lover.
There was a magic belt.
I believe you, but at this point we'll probably have to roll without it. Should send some of the audience members into a proper outrage and juice up the internet activity regarding the show again.
Doug, the show's integrity is important to me, to the work I do.
I don't worry about it. When the viewers start trashing Christie's validity, I'll just have George re-release video clips of her outtakes in Cancun while she was pursuing the legend of the flesh-eating college zombies during the 1977 spring break. Her bikini top fell off 3 times during that show. It's not the same when we mask that here in the States, but a lot of guys download the European versions of the show.
Annja tried not to think about Christie's top falling off. The woman grated on her nerves. What was even more grating was that, of all the hosts of the show, Christie Chatham was the fan favorite.
The ratings really rise during those episodes. Not to say that ratings don't rise whenever you're on. They do. You're one hot babe yourself, Annja.
Thanks loads.
Despite Doug's objections, Annja continues her search for the Beast of Gevaudan with an uneasy feeling that her compulsion to comb the Cévennes mountains has little to do with a legendary monster. While climbing a rocky hillside, she encounters a strange old man who admits to being on a search of his own. Events take an even stranger turn when the ground beneath their feet suddenly trembles. Just as she is thinking that earthquakes rarely happen in France, the earth opens up and Annja plummets into an eerie underground world. Decomposition hadn't settled in. Locked in the steady climate of the cave environment, the dead man was as mummified as the beast. His hands, the flesh so dehydrated it was almost like onion skin over the bones, still held tightly to the spear. Man and beast, locked in savage combat, had killed each other. Kneeling beside the pair, she reached out her hand. Something gleamed at the dead man's throat. Annja plucked the gleaming object. It had partially sunk into the dead man's chest. A leather thong tied the object around the corpse's neck. After freeing the gleaming object, Annja held it up so her flashlight beam could easily illuminate it. A jagged piece of metal, no more than 2 inches to a side, dangled from the leather thong. The piece looked like an ill-made coin, hammered out on some smith's anvil in a hurry. One side held an image of a wolf standing in front of a mountain. The wolf was disproportioned, though the oddities seemed intentional, and it appeared as though the wolf had been hanged. The obverse was stamped with a symbol she couldn't quite make out. Annja remained kneeling. She was checking the image when a flashlight beam whipped across her face. She dodged away, remembering the motorcyclists and the old man she'd seen outside. She tucked the drawing pad, pencils, and charm into her backpack as she scooped up her flashlight and switched it off.
Where the hell did she go?
Shadows created by the glow of the flashlight trailed the beam into the chamber. Annja stayed low as the light sprayed around the room. She barely escaped it before reaching the pile of skulls. Once there, she flattened herself against the wall. Light played over leather-clad bodies that stepped into the chamber. Evidently, the motorcyclists had made their way down the sinkhole using the same passage Annja had found. She'd been so absorbed by her discoveries that she'd forgotten all about them and hadn't noticed them.
She can't have just vanished.
In the soft glow of the reflected flashlight, all 6 of them stood revealed. All of them held pistols. Annja escapes the gunman in the cave with the unlikely assistance of the white-haired old man that she had met earlier on the mountain, but the chase is hardly over. The old man jerked hard left, following the twists and turns. Annja fired again, deliberately aiming toward the center of the lead rider's chest. One of the bullets struck the motorcycle's front tire. Rubber shredded, and the motorcycle went out of control, lunging suddenly into the forest and smashing against a boulder. The gas tank ignited and exploded. Her weapon empty, Annja reached for the second pistol.
Latin?
I find the language more native to my tongue. Hold on!
Annja didn't have time to brace herself on such short notice. The seatbelt bit into her chest as it clamped down when the old man jammed his foot on the brakes. She whipped her head around, watching as the last motorcycle following them down the mountainside tried to stop. The man's efforts only succeeded in locking up his brakes and sending him into an out-of-control skid. He hit the back of the SUV and flipped over the top, landing on the hood of the Mercedes. He lay there for a moment, then weakly tried to bring up the pistol he'd somehow managed to hang on to. Annja lifted her own weapon, but the old man shoved the transmission into reverse and spilled the man from the hood before she could fire. Then the old man shifted back into a forward gear, floored the accelerator, ran him down as he tried to get to his feet. In disbelief, Annja whipped her head around and looked back. The man lay twisted and broken in the path. That was cruel!
You're right. Shooting him would have been much more merciful. After all, for reasons unknown to me, he was willing to kill me to get you. However, I didn't see that we were going to be successful in persuading him to stand still long enough for you to shoot him several times. He'd probably have preferred blowing up against the side of a boulder like his friend.
I don't know who they were. We could go back and check for identification.
Men like that, assassins, rarely carry identification. Feel free to jump out and go back. I won't have hurt feelings. It wouldn't be the first time I've saved someone's life, only to have them squander it foolishly against the very personal thing I saved them from. Do you know if the other men in the cave are dead?
No.
Well, I suppose you might consider the possibility that they're still indisposed is worth the risk. I, however, don't.
Your attitude leaves a lot to be desired.
Annja settled back in the seat, loosening the belt.
You're hardly the grateful sort yourself.
He shoved out his hand. She took it, surprised at the strength she felt in his grip. Then, it felt as if she'd grabbed hold of a branding iron. The old man took his hand back, and the strange sensation ended.
Are you all right?
Yes.
Good. My name is Rue.
Later, at a local bistro, Rue expresses an interest in the charm that Annja retrieved from the cave. Their conversation leaves Annja with many disturbing questions. How did he know about the charm? Why does he ask her about Joan of Arc? And why is Annja suddenly afflicted with waking visions of flames? Against her better judgment, she allows Rue to examine the charm. To her chagrin, he manages to run off with the charm and leave her with the check. Worse, Annja is still being pursued, this time by men who appear to be monks. And again, a rescuer appears out of nowhere. The big man outside shot the large plate glass window twice.
Annja Creed! I've come to help you!
Annja backed away from the nearest black-robed man. She stared at the livid tattoo on his neck. Without warning, he lunged at her. She dodged back, falling to her left hand and sweeping the baton back with her right. The metal end caught her opponent along his jaw and broke his forward movement. She thought she broke his jaw as well. Then the man behind him pulled a pistol from his robe and aimed at her.
Come with us or I will kill you.
Annja believed him. The black-robed man's head emptied in a crimson rush and he pirouetted sideways. Annja pushed to her feet and ran for the broken window. The backpack's weight and the computer slowed her a little, but she gained a tabletop in one lithe leap. Shadows moved around her as she leaped through the broken window and cleared the hedges before the parking lot. The big man took aim again, but when he fired, she wasn't the target.
The door's unlocked.
He broke open the massive handgun and spilled empty brass onto the ground. Taking a speed loader from his pocket, he refilled the cylinder and snapped the weapon closed. Annja found the car's door latch. She opened the door and clambered into the plush leather seat. She expected to feel shredded glass and metal tear through her. When she looked back at the window, all she saw were faint hairline cracks.
Bulletproof glass.
The stranger dropped into the driver's seat. He grinned at her, and she saw her reflection in the black lenses of his wraparound sunglasses.
I never go anywhere without it.
The big man grinned at the men running out of the coffee shop toward them.
Idiots.
They could shoot out the tires.
Let them try. They are run flats. They would have to blow them off the car to get them to fail.
If we wait, maybe they'll roll in a tank.
With a sense of humor. I like that.
"12 anxious minutes later, with no sign of pursuit visible through the rear window, Annja turned to the driver.
Who are you?
Garin.
He offered her his hand. The pistol was tucked between his legs.
Garin Braden, at your service.
Caught off guard, Annja took his hand. Before she knew what he was doing, he folded her fingers inward and kissed the back of her hand.
Enchanté.
Me too. Do you always go around rescuing people from other strange people who want to abduct or kill them for unknown reasons?
Not always.
How did you happen to be there?
Actually, I was looking for you.
Annja took a fresh grip on her baton. If Garin noticed, he obviously didn't feel threatened.
Why?
Aren't you glad I was?
For the moment.
I have no reason to wish you harm, Annja Creed. Would you like to get back the charm Rue took from you?
Yes.
Then we'll go get it. If that's what you want to do.
Annja's new protector finally explains that the charm Annja found in the cave is a missing piece of Joan of Arc's sword, and that Rue has all the other pieces. Annja and Garin reach Rue's palatial, heavily fortified home, and he brings out the box containing the shattered sword. And Annja's adventure moves quickly from unbelievable to downright inexplicable. Annja studied the pieces, finding the charm she had discovered in Labette's lair. It lay with the wolf and mountainside up. Bending down, she switched on the desk light and peered at the image.
What do you know about the charm, Rue?
Nothing. I only knew when I saw it that it was part of this sword.
Joan of Arc's sword?
Karen? You told her? You're a fool. You've always been a fool.
And it's taken you over 500 years to find the pieces of this sword. I'd say that's pretty ineffectual. Perhaps recruiting people to help would have moved things along more quickly.
Annja moved her hand slowly over the sword fragments. Rue, Garin, and Henshaw all drew closer. She moved her hand faster. The heat was back, more intense than before.
Miss Creed, I am certain it is the sword of Joan of Arc, because I saw her wield it.
That was more than 500 years ago.
Yes, it was. I saw the soldiers break Joan's sword. I watched her burn at the stake. There was nothing I could do.
That's impossible.
No. There are things you don't know yet. Impossible things happen. I'm gazing at my latest reminder of that.
Annja held her hand still. The pieces seemed to quiver below her palm. Before she knew she was doing it, she brought both hands closer. Her fingers curled around the leather-wrapped hilt. An explosion of rainbow-colored light filled the case and overflowed into Rue's den. The shadow of something flew overhead on wings of driven snow. For one brief second, Annja lifted the sword from the case. In that second, she was amazed to see that the sword's blade was whole. The rainbow-colored light reflected on the highly polished metal. Images of other lights were caught in the blade's surface. 100 pinpoints of flaming arrows sailed into the sky. Small houses burned to the ground. Running men in armor and covered with flaming oil died in their tracks. At that moment, more than anything, Annja wanted to protect the sword. She didn't want Rue or Garin to take it from her. She had the strangest thought that it had been away too long already. The sword vanished. The weight dissipated from her hands. She was left holding air. Before anyone in the room can figure out where the sword went, before Annja can rationally explain how Rue and Garin can be 500 years old, Rue's small fortress is attacked. Of course, no fortress is complete without a secret escape tunnel, and they all manage to get out alive. But in the ensuing gun battle, Annja is astonished to discover that she seems to be stronger and faster than she was before. She chalks it up to adrenaline and makes her way back to New York. But she can't stop thinking about the sword. It seems to hang in her mind, as though she can just reach out and touch it.
What the hell are you doing, lady?
Annja's eyes snapped open. In disbelief, she saw the sword in her hand stretched across the back of the taxi. It obstructed the driver's view through the back window. He looked terrified. She was holding the sword. Under full steam, the driver leaped out of the taxi. He reached under the seat for an L-shaped tire iron that looked as if it could have been used on the kill floors in a slaughterhouse.
You! Out of my cab!
For the moment, though, Annja ignored him. Somewhere during the confusion, the sword had disappeared.
But it was here. I saw it. I felt it.
For the next few days, Annja comes to one realization after another. Caught up in an incident in the gym where she works out, she discovers that her concentration, strength, and reflexes are 10 times what they were before. She can draw Joan of Arc's sword from its mystical otherwhere at will, and just as easily make it disappear. And despite her natural skepticism, it seems more and more likely that Rue and Garin really are 500 years old. Their longevity is inextricably tied to the sword's existence, and Garin, for one, is not willing to see his immortality threatened, as Annja discovers when she returns one day to her Brooklyn loft. He came at her without warning, rushing at her low and grabbing her hips as he shoved her back against the stove. He fumbled for one of the knives in the wooden block by the sink. Grabbing a thick-bladed butcher's knife, he raised it to strike. Freeing her right arm from Garin's grasp, Annja drove the heel of her palm into his nose. Blood spurted as the cartilage collapsed. He tried to hang on to her. His knife hand came down. Annja twisted and avoided the knife. The blade thudded deep into the countertop. She reared up against him, forcing him back. Shifting, she butted him aside with her hip, stepped on his foot, head-butted him under the chin, and brought an elbow strike into line with his jaw. Garin stepped back, his black eyes glassy. He punched at her, but she slapped his arm aside. Then he caught her with an incredibly fast left hand. Annja dropped as if she'd been hit with a bag of wet cement. Her senses spun, and for a moment she thought she was going to pass out. Garin came after her immediately. On the ground, she knew from experience, his greater size and weight would take away every advantage her speed and strength gave her. She rolled backward and flipped to her feet in the center of the loft. Annja only had to think of the sword for a split second, and it was in her hand. Stepping back, right leg behind her left, hilt gripped firmly in both hands, she readied the sword. Garin halted, completely out of running room. All Annja had to do was swing, but he'd stopped his aggressions.
Are you going to kill him, then?
Circling slowly, Annja maintained her grip on the sword. She turned just enough to see Rue standing in the doorway.
Don't either of you respect a person's privacy?
I knocked. No one answered. Then I heard the sounds of a scuffle. I thought it best if I investigated.
Rue took off his long jacket. He wore a casual tan suit.
Are you going to kill him?
Garin watched her carefully. He kept his hands spread to the side, ready to move. Annja continued to slowly circle, never crossing her feet so she wouldn't trip. She stopped when Rue was behind Garin.
I don't know yet.
Annja finds that despite her newfound skills and supernatural weapon, she is reluctant to kill another human being unless it is necessary to protect herself or save another life. Her fortitude is soon put to the test. The group of criminals and the brotherhood of monks that have been pursuing her are soon after her again, and the life of an innocent young man hangs in the balance. Annja feels compelled to return to France and save him, and Rue agrees to help her complete the rescue mission. Garin refuses, but Annja suspects that she hasn't seen the last of him. Annja and Rue embark upon a dangerous adventure involving an ancient hunting cult, Vatican secrets, and a 200-year-old mystery. They even solve the puzzle of the Beast of Gevaudan. But what about the puzzle that has taken over Annja's life?
What am I supposed to do with the sword?
What do you mean? It's your sword now. You do with it whatever you wish.
But shouldn't I do something special with it?
Annja Creed, you are something special. The sword only allows you to act on your natural gifts with more authority. You have a destiny ahead of you that no one in this world has ever had. You've not been given the sword to be another Joan of Arc. She did what she had to do. You have to figure out what it is you're supposed to do, like everyone else.
Annja looked at him and felt he was telling the truth. Rue had lied about things in the past and would likely do so again in the future, but she knew he wasn't lying now.
Thank you.
She moved the umbrella and lay back in the warm sun. She thought about everything she should be doing. All the cataloging of the things in her loft, the certificates of authenticity she had to do, the trip she wanted to take to North Africa, the next story she'd have to pitch to Doug Morell. And somewhere in there, she dropped off to sleep. Her destiny stretched out before her. There was no need to rush to meet it. It was already waiting for her. Follow the adventures of Annja Creed in Alex Archer's Rogue Angel series, available at www.graphicaudio.net.